Alright, fellow sleuths, time to take a look at the second episode of the day, which is The Reunion of Lost Souls. Nancy the Druker visited Hannah Groom's cemetery for help on getting rid of the Igleka and finding the sea shanty. To help they solve her problem, she will go away. Nick doesn't have a place to stay as Victoria kicked him out, so Nancy offers her house as Carson is back at the loft. Hannah finds a record of the shanty written by an unknown author in the 1800s. There is one recording of a song that is owned by a man named Mac. The Druger heads out to find Mac, but Nancy is sidetracked by a tombstone of Captain Douglas Marvin, while the Igleka watches from the woods. George avoids her death omen by walking to work despite the cold weather and Nick's offer. She's almost hit by a car, but she punches angrily. Nancy, Bess, and Ace visit a bar looking for Mac. The bartender informs them that Johnny Mac died 40 years ago, and only his flask and bar tab remains. They decide to settle Mac's bar tab in exchange for the flask. At the Claw, Nick opens early for his mom, who is visiting to see his purchase of the Claw. She wants him to come back to Florida. George walks in, complaining about the car that almost hit her. Nick's about admits to being the driver, though she doesn't hold disdain toward George for punching her truck. Bess tries to find the 45, but has no luck, though Nancy finds his arrest record from 1973 and death certificate from 1975. Nick enters, just wanting to sleep despite his growing problems. Nancy gives him blankets and a pillow for the couch. He wakens late the night to find Nick. He wakens late the night to the sound of clattering. He finds the kitchen a disaster and sees the ghost of Johnny Mac behind him. Mac attacks and causes the kitchen to shake violently and glasses to break behind Nick. Nick notices a bruise on his wrist while cleaning the kitchen, then remembers that he saw the same guy at Diana Marvin's party, though he confused Nick for a waiter. Nick thinks the guy is John MacDonald, and Nancy recommends Nick play along the next time Johnny appears. He agrees, so he has to meet his mom, placing Bess on work duty. Ace sees Carson struggling with the futon frame and helps him carry it into the loft. Carson wants to know if Nancy is okay. He tells Ace to make sure she eats, as she often forgets when she's stressed. Meanwhile, George and Bess work while Nick serves his mom orange juice. His friend from varsity was shot in the park when a drug deal went wrong. The family thinks it's a case of mistaken identity. He assures her that won't happen to him, but mails it reminding him of his arrest and the realities of the police. He wants her to get to know Horseshoe Bay and George, volunteering George as their tour guide. Nancy visits the only woman who attended Mac's funeral, Kat. She tells Nancy about Johnny's paranoia and violence before he died. The only other friend he had was Buddy, his bartender. George smells at the museum while Nick searches for an employee. He finds Johnny instead and plays along with Johnny's scenario and learns that Mac summoned the Igleka alongside his friends. He asks about the record, but Johnny becomes unstable and all the glass of the aisle shatters. Millie, Nick, and George return, and he introduces his mother to Nancy. She's appreciative of Nancy and her family. Nancy calls the employee meeting, and George realizes why Johnny is attached to Nick. Buddy, the bartender, was also black, so Johnny is confusing Nick for Buddy. Nancy wonders if the orphanage has any record of Johnny. She calls Ace, who promises to keep looking, though he's delivering things to Carson. He wants to know Carson's side of the story. Carson explains they were a family, and telling Nancy the truth would change everything. He wanted to focus on the present, where everything was perfect as opposed to the future. Ace relates, so Carson offers his help if they need it. He asks about the orphanage, which Carson does remember. The Drew crew drive to the location of the orphanage, which had become a legend after it was scrubbed from maps and public records. Ace notes that the status of everything reminds him of Roanoke, the vanished colony. Bess finds a photograph of Mac with a bunch of people, all of whom the crew had encounters with throughout the week. All of them died on the same day in freak accidents. They see the arm of another man who is listed as AJ, and they believe he's the only living member of the group. They search Mac's room for the 45, only to find a human skull and event instead. Detective Timur and the police arrive to claim the bones that Nancy believes are remains of AJ Nishiyama. The group answers all Timur's questions of these, and Timur thanks them for their hunch. Nancy and the Drew crew regroup in the cloud where Mac's spirit appears to Nick again. He's rummaging through the bottles looking for the 45 that Buddy hid. He smashes all the glasses and vanishes. George notices bruises on Nick's neck that Bess recognizes as ghost bruises. Nancy visits Ace in the back where he's taking the unused supplies to Carson. She's sure that Carson isn't talking to her, which Ace understands. Though the Glick are coming for them, they might not have long to make things right. Zamora calls her to let her know that the bones they found belonged to Buddy Fowler. He had a broken wrist and 4 ribs from where he was beaten, and his body was full of injuries. Bess realizes that Mac strangled Buddy, and now Mac is trying to kill Nick. Millie overhears and demands answers. They explain the situation to Millie, who was aware of the supernatural, and uses this as another reason she and Nick should leave. Nick agrees to leave with her and suggests she not visit. Millie leaves while Nick storms off. Nancy finds him and they talk about his relationship with George. Then Nancy assures him they don't have to explain. She's happy that they're happy. Things probably won't be okay with his mom, though he's scared that it's the last time he'll see her. She understands that she hasn't spoken to Carson but misses him. Nancy realizes LJ is signed up for Mac to kill Buddy, as Buddy took the record to use as collateral for his bar tab, meaning the record might still be at the bar. George visits Millie to apologize for her behavior, explaining the reasonings for her personality and why she's the perfect one to protect Nick. She doesn't think they should leave in the middle of a fight. Millie wants to help Nick and his friends. The Drew crew head to the bar, and Nick gives the bartender a wad of cash to rent out the bar for the night. They split up to search for the record. Millie and George arrive a few moments later to help. Nancy sees the record in a jukebox and tries to access it, which sparks Mac to appear. He begins to attack Nick while Nancy frantically tries to access the record. George breaks the mirror and forces Mac to appear. Nancy grabs the record and starts playing it. Mac listens to the song as his friends appear behind him. They all fade away into smoke, while Nick struggles to catch his breath. Bess eerily calls that their future. Millie is cooking when George enters. They cook together and she gives George her blessing to be with Nick by teaching her Nick's favorite dish. Ace, Bess, and Nancy listen to the record while Bess reads through the Marvin family history. Captain Marvin's wife, Odette Lamar, died of consumption on the way to America, which Nancy doesn't think is enough to create a violent ghost. Ace analyzes the song and finds a new recording that features Odette singing her story in French. She was kidnapped by Captain Marvin for her fortune and then executed. The song would be the last thing they ever hear. Ace realizes the Glica came for the souls of the 1975 Summers in 7 days after the ritual, which means they only have 3 days left. Nick says goodbye to Millie and admits his most painful memories when the judge sentenced him and she cried. He has to prove he isn't scared boy who made his mother cry before he comes home. She accepts this as his journey and he prays over her. Nancy drops off the cloth supplies to Carson. They gather in the cemetery over Mac's grave to bury the flask. The flowers are from Harbor Day, the same flowers on Rita's grave and the other Glica victims from 1975. Card is eligible that reads, "Forgive me, Kitsune." The Kitsune nickname belonged to AJ, was a fox tattoo, and knows how to defeat the Glica. Interesting. So now let's take a look at some trivia surrounding this episode. On March 13th, 2020, production of this episode was shut down indefinitely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. On October 5, 2020, it resumed back up again after a minor production setback on September 30th, 2020. Unfortunately, due to the 6-month shutdown imposed on this episode, Rachel Ramis couldn't return to finish it due to her other commitments, so Ed Sanchez was brought in to direct the remaining of this episode. The local Straightmeyer Woods is mentioned. The Nancy Drew series was created by the Straightmeyer Syndicate. The Glica kills its victims 7 days after they call it, and Nancy mentions this episode that they have 3 days left before it comes for them. This places the Drew Crew's calling of the Glica in the terror of Horseshoe Bay 4 days earlier. So overall, I think this is a pretty interesting episode, and yeah, I really hope that the Drew Crew are hopefully getting close to finding a way to get rid of this thing, so yeah. So overall, I give The Reunion of Lost Souls 4.5 Deerstalkers out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in as we take a look at the final episode of the day, The Secret of Solitary Scribe. So until then, remember everyone, the game's afoot.